I forced my son to call another man dad, cut off his father's family at Thanksgiving, and made him perform for my new in-laws. He refused to play along and destroyed me in public. I created this. He was 11 years old. 11. And he stood in the middle of my mother-in-law's living room in front of 17 people and he said, "That's not my dad. My dad is Kevin." And then he said the thing I've been hearing in my head every single day since. He said, "She just wants you to think he is." 17 people. My husband. His parents. His sister and her husband. Their kids. 2 family friends I had known for 8 months. My mother. My aunt. 17 people watched my 11-year-old son tell the truth about what I had been doing for 2 years. Nobody in that room said anything for about 4 seconds. Then my mother-in-law said, "Charles, why don't you go get some juice from the kitchen?" He said, "Okay." He walked out. The room stayed quiet. I sat with 17 pairs of eyes on me and I had nothing. No version. No reframe. No explanation that would turn what he said into something other than what it was. Because what he said was true. I created it. Every word of it. I had been creating it for 2 years, and he had been watching me create it, and on a Sunday afternoon in November he had simply decided he was done watching. I created this. Let me tell you how. My name is Diane. I'm 37. I have a son named Charles who is now 13 and a half and who I am in the slow and uncertain process of trying to actually know for the first time. His father is Kevin. Kevin and I were together for 6 years and married for 4. Charles was born in year 3 of the marriage. Kevin and I ended when Charles was 4. Not dramatically. Not with a specific betrayal. With the slow suffocation of 2 people who had become wrong for each other and had stayed too long after they knew it. The divorce was civil. We had a parenting plan. Charles spent time with both of us. Kevin's family, his mother and 2 sisters and their families, had always been present in Charles's life. He called Kevin's mother Grandma Carol. He called Kevin's sisters Auntie Bev and Auntie Dee. He had cousins on that side he loved. That was the family Charles had for the first 4 years of his life. Then I met Nathan. Nathan is my husband now. We married when Charles was 7. I want to be honest about what happened when Nathan came into my life, and what I did with it. I liked that Nathan was stable. Kevin was a good father, but our co-parenting relationship was tense in the way that co-parenting is tense when 2 people know each other too well and can't quite stop being disappointed. Nathan had no history with me. No old wounds. He was calm and present and he wanted a family. He wanted a family. I was a mother with a son. I had something to offer. I want to sit with that sentence for a moment because I need to be honest about it. I was thinking about what I had to offer Nathan and what Nathan had to offer me, and Charles was part of the calculation. Not cruelly, but calculatingly. Which is its own kind of cruelty when the calculation involves your child. Nathan had no children. He wanted them. He liked Charles. Charles was 5 when they met and Nathan was good with him. Patient. Playful. Showed up to things. Brought the right kind of energy. I told myself Charles needed a stable father figure. I told myself Kevin's inconsistencies, real but manageable, were more damaging than a new consistent presence. I told myself a 2-parent household with Nathan was better for Charles than the arrangement we had. I was telling myself these things because I wanted Nathan and I needed the narrative to support what I wanted. I know that now. I didn't know it then. Or I did know it and I chose not to look at it. The first thing I did wrong happened when Charles was 6. Nathan and Charles were getting along well. Nathan had started calling himself Charles's bonus dad, which Charles had accepted with the indifference of a 6-year-old who doesn't fully understand the implications of language. I had started gently discouraging Charles from talking about Kevin at Nathan's apartment. Not forbidding. Discouraging. Not yet. When Charles mentioned Kevin, I would change the subject. When he brought up something they'd done together, I would respond minimally and move on. When he asked when he was going to see his dad next, I would answer quickly and then introduce something else. Small things. The kind of thing you can tell yourself isn't a pattern even when you know it is. Then Charles turned 7 and I married Nathan and the discouraging became something else. The Thanksgiving cut happened when Charles was 8. Kevin's mother had hosted Thanksgiving every year Charles had been alive. Charles expected to go. It was on our parenting schedule. Kevin's week. I moved things around. I told Kevin I needed Charles for Thanksgiving because Nathan's family wanted to meet him. Kevin agreed, reluctantly. I told Charles we were doing something new this year. He asked about Grandma Carol's. I said, "We'll do something with that family another time." He said, "But we always go to Grandma Carol's." I said, "This year we're doing something different. Nathan's family is excited to meet you." He said, "Okay." He said okay in the way 8-year-olds say okay when they have no leverage and they know it. That okay did not mean he was okay. It meant he had no other option. I knew the difference. I chose to accept the okay. At Thanksgiving with Nathan's family, Charles was quiet. Politely quiet. He answered questions. He ate. He sat where I put him. Nathan's mother kept touching his hair and calling him a doll, and he let her and looked at me once with an expression I didn't want to read. On the drive home he said, "Is Grandma Carol going to be sad we didn't come?" I said, "She'll understand." He said, "Did you tell her we weren't coming?" I said, "Your father handled that." He said, "Oh." He didn't say anything else. That was the Thanksgiving that ended. Not officially. I found reasons every year after. Nathan's parents were getting older and the holiday mattered to them. My family was doing something different. Travel was complicated. There was always a reason. Grandma Carol saw Charles at Kevin's parenting time. Less and less as the schedule shifted. Charles stopped talking about Auntie Bev. He stopped mentioning his cousins on that side. The people he had called family for the first 4 years of his life became people he saw occasionally and didn't mention at home. I told myself this was natural. Families reconfigure. Children adapt. I know what it actually was. The dad thing started when Charles was 9. Nathan had been in his life for 3 years at that point. They had a real relationship. Charles liked Nathan. I'm not going to pretend he didn't. Nathan was good to him. Showed up. Coached his soccer team for 1 season. Came to school things. But Charles had Kevin. Kevin showed up too. Called consistently. Did his time. Was present in the specific way of a father who loves his child and is working within the limits of a schedule he didn't design. Nathan started saying my dad when he talked to Charles. Not your stepdad. My. As in, come show my dad what you built. Come tell my dad about the game. I let it happen. I more than let it happen. I encouraged it. I said things like, "Nathan is so proud of you. Tell your dad what happened at school." Your dad. Charles did not correct me the first few times. He was 9. He was trying to figure out the social landscape of this house, and he had learned that certain things made things easier and certain things made things harder. Calling Nathan dad made things easier. For me. For Nathan. For the general atmosphere of the house. So Charles called him dad sometimes. I told myself he was adapting. Bonding. Growing into the family. I know what it actually was. Charles was managing me. At 9 years old he had already learned how to manage me. The performance piece was gradual. Like all of it. Nathan's parents hosted things. Birthday dinners. Holidays. Gatherings where the family came together, and Charles was there as Nathan's son. As their grandson. As the child of this family. I wanted that picture. I needed Charles to be in that picture in a specific way. Present. Engaged. Warm. The kind of step-family story that convinces everyone, including yourself, that what you built is real. Charles was good at it when he chose to be. He had learned the performance. He could do warm-hearted stepson when I needed it. Nathan's mother adored him. His father called him sport and ruffled his hair, and Charles let it happen. But there were moments when he wouldn't. When the ask was too large, or the room was too full, or the specific performance required was too far from what he actually felt. In those moments I would say things to him privately. Before events. In the car. Reminders about how important this was. About how Nathan's family loved him. About how lucky we were to have this. He would say okay. Always okay. The specific compliance of a child who has figured out that resistance costs more than performance. I read the okay as agreement. I chose to read it as agreement. Here is what I did not let myself know until after the living room. Kevin's mother called him twice a month. I knew this. Charles had a phone by then, and Kevin's number and Grandma Carol's number were in it. They talked on Tuesdays, and he went to his room to do it, and I told myself this was fine. But I also made comments. Not big ones. Not obviously nasty ones. Small ones. Offhand. A tone in my voice when Kevin's name came up. A slight correction when Charles mentioned something Kevin had said or done. The specific facial expression that says without words that you don't fully respect the person being discussed. Charles watched my face when he talked about Kevin. I know this because I watched him watching. He learned to talk about Kevin less. Not because Kevin mattered less to him. Because talking about Kevin came with a cost that got charged to our relationship. I charged that cost deliberately. I know this. I did it deliberately and told myself it was natural. I am writing this now because not saying it would be one more way of not looking at what I did. I did it on purpose. Slowly. Carefully. The way you do something slowly and carefully when you know if you did it fast someone would see it. That Sunday in November. We were at Nathan's parents' house for what they called a fall gathering. Informal. Extended family. Close friends. The kind of event where people ask children questions to include them and children are expected to answer in ways that confirm the warmth of the family picture. Nathan's aunt was talking to Charles. She was asking the kind of questions adults ask children when they're performing interest. School. Sports. What grade? What do you want to be? Then she said, and do you like having a stepdad? Charles looked at her. Then he looked at Nathan. Then he looked at me. And something happened on his face that I had never let myself see before. Something that had been building for 2 years under the okay and the performance and the compliance and the managed face he brought to every one of these events. He said, Nathan is nice. She said, that's sweet. Do you call him Dad? Charles said, sometimes. She said, that's so lovely. It's wonderful when blended families work out. And he said, she just wants you to think he is. Just like that. Conversational. Not loud. Not angry. Just a flat true statement delivered in the tone of a child who has run out of reasons to pretend. She looked confused. He said, my dad is Kevin. She makes me call Nathan Dad because it's easier for her. The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in pieces. The closest people first. Then spreading out. My mother-in-law said, Charles, why don't you go get some juice? He said, okay. He walked out. And I sat in the silence of 17 people who had just heard an 11-year-old describe exactly what I had been doing. In his words. Without anger. Without drama. Just fact. Just fact. What happened after he left the room? Nobody attacked me. I want to be accurate about that. It wasn't an ambush. It was silence. The specific silence of people who have received information they don't know what to do with and are choosing to process privately. Nathan's mother excused herself to check on something in the kitchen. Nathan's father started a conversation on the other side of the room that had nothing to do with what had just happened. Nathan sat next to me. He did not say anything for a few minutes. Then he said, quietly, we should probably talk tonight. I said, I know. My mother caught my eye from across the room. She had a look I recognized. Not the angry version of that look. The sad one. The one that means I see what's happening and I wish I could fix it and I can't. I looked at my hands. Charles came back from the kitchen with a glass of juice. He sat down and drank it and watched something on his phone and said nothing for the rest of the afternoon. I watched him the whole time. He did not look at me once. Not once. The drive home. Nathan drove. Charles was in the back seat. I was in the passenger seat. Nobody said anything for 11 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock. Then Charles said, I'm sorry if I made it weird. Nathan said, it's okay, buddy. Charles said, I didn't plan to say it. Nathan said, I know. Then Charles said, it's just true. Nathan said, I know that too. Silence for another 4 minutes. Then Nathan said, Charles, I want you to know something. Charles said, what? Nathan said, I'm not trying to replace your dad. Kevin is your dad. I know that. I've always known that. Charles said, okay. Nathan said, I should have said that more clearly before now. Charles said, okay. He went back to his phone. I sat in the passenger seat and felt the specific weight of watching a man handle something better than I had been handling it for 2 years. My husband. Being clearer and more honest with my son in 4 minutes than I had been in 2 years. We got home. Charles went to his room. Nathan and I sat in the kitchen. He did not yell at me. He does not yell. He sat across from me and said, I need to understand what's been happening. I told him. Not everything at first. Then more. Then more. By the end of the conversation I had said things out loud that I had not said to myself. The Thanksgiving cut. The discouraging Kevin talk. The performance expectations. The pressure to say dad when he didn't want to. Nathan listened to all of it. When I finished he said, Diane. I said, I know. He said, how long? I said, 2 years at least. He said, did you know what you were doing? I looked at him. He said, I'm not asking to be cruel. I'm asking because the answer matters. I said, yes. He said, okay. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, Charles knew what was happening. I said, yes. He said, he was managing it. I said, yes. Nathan said, he's 11. I said, I know. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know yet. He said, you need to talk to him. I said, I know. He said, really talk to him. Not the version where you explain yourself. The version where you listen. I said, I know. He looked at me. He said, I mean it. He said, that kid has been performing for 2 years. He needs to stop performing. I said, I know. He said, do you actually know? Because I need you to actually know. I said yes. And then I said nothing for a long time because yes was all I had and it was not enough. I knocked on Charles's door that night. He said, come in. He was doing homework. Or pretending to. The pencil was in his hand but not moving. I sat on the edge of his bed. He kept his eyes on the paper. I said, I need to talk to you. He said, okay. I said, not okay like you usually say okay. I need you to actually hear me. He looked up. I said, I owe you an apology. A real one. He said nothing. I said, what you said today was true. I have been putting pressure on you to act a certain way. With Nathan. With his family. I have been making you perform something that wasn't real and I have been pretending it was real because it was easier for me. He looked at me with an expression I did not know how to read. Not angry. Not relieved. Something more complicated. I said, I also owe you an apology for what I did with your dad's family. His face shifted slightly. I said, Grandma Carol. Auntie Bev. Auntie Dee. Your cousins. I made those relationships harder than they needed to be because I was building something new and I didn't want the old things in the way. He said, I still talk to Grandma Carol. I said, I know. I said, I know you call her on Tuesdays. I should have been the one making sure those calls happened. Instead, I let you manage that yourself. He said, she asks about you sometimes. I said, what do you say? He said, I say you're fine. I said, that's kind of you. He said, she doesn't have a bad thing to say about you. Ever. I sat with that. Carol. Who I had quietly cut out of holiday gatherings. Who I had allowed to become marginal in her grandson's life. Who had never said a bad word about me to that grandson. I said, she's a good person. He said, yeah. I said, I'm going to fix some things. I said, Thanksgiving this year. If you want to go to Grandma Carol's, I think we should go. He looked at me. I said, I mean it. Not as a performance. Because you love her and you should be there. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, can I bring Nathan? I said, that's up to Nathan. But I think he'd come if you asked. He nodded. He said, Mom? I said, yeah. He said, I didn't want to say it in front of everyone. I said, I know. He said, I just got tired. I said, I know. He said, you kept doing it even when I didn't want to and I didn't know how to make you stop. That sentence. I didn't know how to make you stop. An 11-year-old who had spent 2 years trying to find a way to make me stop and had finally run out of quiet ways to do it. I said, I'm sorry. Not as a platform. Not leading to an explanation. Just the 2 words. Standing alone. He said, okay. He went back to his homework. I sat there for another minute. Then I left. I want to tell you about the call I made the next morning. I called Kevin. Not to perform. Not to manage the narrative of what had happened. To actually say something. He picked up. He was wary. We are always slightly wary with each other. The old wounds do not go away, but they can be managed. I said, something happened yesterday and I need to tell you about it. I told him. What Charles had said. What it had revealed about what I'd been doing. Kevin was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I know some of what you're describing. I said, what do you mean? He said, Charles has mentioned things. Not directly. In the way kids mention things when they're trying to process. I said, I didn't know that. He said, I didn't want to make it a fight between us. He said, I was hoping it would settle on its own. I said, it didn't settle. It just compressed. He said, yeah. I said, I'm sorry, Kevin. I said, not for the divorce. I know we were right to end it. I said, I'm sorry for what I did after. For making it harder for Charles to have his family. He was quiet. Then he said, "My mother is going to need to hear that from you." I said, "I know." I said, "Is she available later this week?" He said, "Call her on Tuesday. She's always home on Tuesdays." I said, "I will." He said, "Diane." I said, "Yeah." He said, "He's a good kid." I said, "I know." He said, "He figures things out." I said, "He figured this out." Kevin said, "Yeah." He said, "He did." I called Carol on Tuesday. She picked up warmly. She always picks up warmly. I have never understood how someone I treated the way I treated Carol can still pick up warmly when I call. It says something about her that is the opposite of something I want to say about myself. I told her what happened. What Charles had said. What I had done over 2 years. She listened. When I was done, she said, "I knew some of it." I said, "What did Charles tell you?" She said, "Enough." She said, "I didn't push. I could tell he was managing things." She said, "I just kept showing up. Tuesdays. I kept showing up." I said, "I know." I said, "I'm sorry, Carol." She was quiet. Then she said, "Charles loves you. I want you to know that. What you did hurt him and he's going to need time and he knows you love him even when you got it wrong." I said, "I know I got it wrong." She said, "Yes." She said, "Now you do." She said, "Now make it right." I said, "Thanksgiving. This year. I'd like to bring Charles to your house if that's okay." She said, "It's always been okay." I said, "I know." I said, "I should have kept it okay." She said, "Yes." She said, "But you're keeping it okay now." I said, "I'm trying." She said, "Trying is where it starts." We talked for another 20 minutes. About Charles. About Kevin. About nothing important and everything important. When we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. She had shown up every Tuesday. For 2 years. While I was making it harder. While I was managing the picture. While I was performing the family I wanted. She just kept showing up. 3 months later. We are not fixed. I want to be clear about that. This is not a story with a fixed ending. This is a story with a working ending. Ongoing. Incomplete. Charles is different with me now. Not warmer exactly. Freer. The performance is mostly gone. He says what he thinks more often. Sometimes I don't like what he thinks. I try to listen anyway. He went to Grandma Carol's for Thanksgiving. Nathan came. Nathan brought a dish because Nathan is the kind of person who brings a dish and learned that Carol's kitchen has specific customs about contributed food and honored those customs precisely. Charles and his cousins on that side picked up where they left off the way cousins do when the gap in time doesn't matter as much as the shared context. They were loud. The house was loud. It was the opposite of controlled and curated and managed. It was Thanksgiving. After dinner, Charles found me in Carol's kitchen. He said, "This is better." I said, "I know." He said, "Why didn't we do this before?" I said, "Because I was making a mistake." I said, "I'm not making it anymore." He said, "Okay." He went back to his cousins. Carol came into the kitchen. She handed me something to dry. We did the dishes together. She said, "That boy." I said, "Yeah." She said, "He's going to be something." I said, "He already is." She handed me another dish. We did the dishes. I am writing this because silence is another version of what I was already doing. I spent 2 years managing what people saw. Constructing a picture. Controlling the story. My son walked into a living room and said the true thing in front of 17 people because he had run out of quiet ways to say it. The least I can do is say it too. I forced my son to call another man dad. Not because Charles needed a father. Because I needed a picture. Kevin was there. Kevin was present. Kevin showed up. My son had a father. He had 2 families who loved him. I decided that arrangement was inconvenient for the life I was building and I quietly made it smaller. I cut off his grandmother. His aunts. His cousins. Not cruelly. Gradually. In ways I could tell myself were reasonable. I kept finding reasons and Charles kept saying okay. He said okay for 2 years. Then he stopped. He said, "She just wants you to think he is 11 years old." He had been carrying that sentence for at least a year. Probably longer. Carrying it through Thanksgivings and birthday dinners and car rides and Tuesday phone calls he made quietly from his room. Carrying it through every okay he gave me when I needed him to perform something he didn't feel. He put it down in that living room. He put it down and walked to the kitchen for juice. And I sat in the silence of 17 people and understood, for the first time, what I had actually been asking him to carry. I created it. All of it. And the only thing left to do with that is to stop creating it and start paying attention to what my son actually needs instead of what I need him to perform. He deserves that. He deserved it before the living room. He's been deserving it since the beginning. I just finally heard him when he stopped asking quietly and said it out loud. Too loud to ignore. In front of 17 people. Who all heard it too.